to go right into our speaker because this is such a wonderful time to hear and refresh. Now, refresh, we're all advocates. We wouldn't be in the United Nations Association if we were not advocates for the United Nations. The United Nations itself has been the voice for so many years of those who don't have a voice. They've been the voice for so many of the countries. 192 countries now are members. And I remember when Secretary General U Thant said, we're never going to have peace if we don't have a spiritual voice here at the United Nations. And that was when my husband was his assistant. Robert Mueller was Secretary General U Thant's assistant. And he said, well, we can invite the Pope. We can invite the Pope because the Pope is a member of the General Assembly. I mean, not the Pope, but the Vatican. So with that, the Pope came. Well, you know, we had more PR about the public relations and about the United Nations because the Pope was there. So it did accomplish two big goals. One, to get the spiritual voice, and two, to allow the United Nations to have front page of the New York Times. So we have to be always thinking, how can we be a transformational advocate? It's not an easy thing, but today I thought, well, let's just bring in the expert. Let's bring in Sam Daley-Harris. Many of you have been listening to his podcast. Do you know, since I sent out the announcement, we have had 50 people listen to Sam Daley-Harris. His Peace Podcast, he's the third one at the top whenever you go on peacepodcast.org, and he gives you all the details that he may not have time to talk about today. But when you listen and you hear, I'm going to ask us eventually to have a meeting where all of us who have been reading his book, Democracy, Reclaiming Our Democracy, Every Citizen's Guide to Transformational Advocacy. It's his second revision of the book, his second, and I ordered it on Amazon. It came within 2 days and I couldn't put it down. And I was going to put him on a podcast, which I did. And I was so glad because chapter 21 is my Bible. It is the process to have a laser advocacy. We call it the laser talk. Look, Mike Caruso, you put your background back on. I want to show people, Mike Caruso and I are on a team. We are wanting to end war, period. We are members of the Rotary and we want to do Ending War 101. We started to create our laser talk on ending war. And so Ending War 101, can war be ended? Is it just war ever possible? What does war cost us? And what can we do? So we're preparing our laser talk. So when we go to Washington or are on the phone with our congressman, and we get Jenny to help us because she's got everybody in her pocket, we're going to be able to say exactly what we want them to hear. And so without further ado, I want you to know a little bit about Sam Daley-Harris. First of all, he's been my hero for years. Why? Because the people I put on my peacepodcast.org are all graduates of Results. Frank Sanitati, he just sent me a recent editorial. His editorials are published. Why? Because he uses the technology that Sam taught him in Results, and he'll tell you about Results. Now, Sam didn't start out being an advocate for the world and changing the world one day at a time and one Congress at a time. He was a musician. And he found an anti-poverty lobby. He founded the anti-poverty lobby called Results in 1980, co-founded the Microcredit Summit campaign in 1995, and founded the group Civic Courage in 2012. Sam Daley-Harris also coached Citizens Climate Lobby its first 7 years. The 2024 edition of his book, as I just mentioned, is out. And you look at my book, I hope you can see all the stickies. You see all those stickies? This book is full of data. You will be able to stop underlining and putting stickies on every page because every page is so valuable. Now, he has reclaimingyourdemocracy.com, but he's also on peacepodcast.org. And he was named, get this, everybody wants to be a bestseller, but when you're named, when you get the distinction of editor's pick by Publishers Weekly, then you know your book has made it. And with that, Sam Daley-Harris, I'm going to put you on speaker view, and thank all of you who have joined us just to hear Sam Daley-Harris. And now, Sam, the floor is yours, and I bless you for being here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, everyone. Do you know what it's like hearing that chapter 21 is Barbara's Bible? I mean, I wish my mother was still around to hear that news. Could you make me a co-host?
I sure can.
I can share some slides. It's a real thrill being with all of you. I'm so honored to be with you because of your work on behalf of the United Nations, on behalf of peace, and on behalf of the end of poverty. And so I'm grateful for your work, and I'm honored to be here. And I want to say, I'm going to do some talk right now, and you're going to think, well, we already do that. Yeah. Just thank yourself, acknowledge yourself. And maybe some of the things I say will have you go, we could try that. Okay, fine. There might be a stretch in there for you to do. So I'm going to show a couple of slides with some quotes, and I'm going to come off slides and then go back. I have had the honor of being interviewed on several national NPR shows, and I've been moved by the vulnerability of these hosts. And I'm going to share one of the slides, which is a quote. It'll take me a moment to get it full screen. I want to do that if I
You're
can.
there.
I might not bother getting it full screen. Oh,
You can see it.
okay. So the point is, I was interviewed on 1A in January, and the host that day was Todd Zwillich. And this was question number 2. He said, the passive nature to our politics now, you can feel beat down by it. I mean, this is my career, and I feel beat down by it. It's much more of an effort for me. I don't participate in the same way others do because I'm a political journalist, but I do have to pay attention. It's a grind. It's a grind, Sam. I mean, I know you know that. What am I feeling? What's the way out of that? I'm not an activist, but you know what I'm saying. That he would be that vulnerable. I'm assuming there were tens of thousands that listen to 1A around the country. I don't even know if it goes to Southern California. But the first thing I said to him was, well, Apollo astronaut Rusty Schweikert said, we aren't passengers on Spaceship Earth. We're the crew. Well, are we? And if we are crew, how does crew operate? And the second thing I said to him was that climate activist and futurist Alex Steffen said, in fact, these days, cynicism is obedience.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, if I'm cynical, I'm obedient to the way things are. I mean, why would I do anything about it? I mean, nothing I do makes a difference, and therefore my cynicism. I was also interviewed in January on Here and Now. I think it goes to 400 stations. And
Yeah.
one of the questions from Deepa Fernandez was this one. One of the things I found really insightful in your book, you say, to move from passively caring about something, say the environment, climate change, these big things that are actually happening in our lives, to actually taking action, we have to, and I'm quoting from you here in your book, be honest about the hopelessness that's in all of us. I found that really struck a chord with me, Sam, because the issues we do care about sometimes seem massive and immutable. How do you move past that sense of hopelessness? And so we're going to deal with these kinds of issues. But again, I was very struck by how honest and vulnerable these national hosts were. So one of the ideas in the book is not an idea from me, but it's an idea about the importance of knowing your why and sharing it. Why do you do what you do? why are you active in the United Nations Association and sharing that? And so this is basically called the story of self, and it was developed by Harvard professor Marshall Gans. And I'm going to tell a shortened version of my story of self, and I want you to think about yours. I mean, you may tell yours all the time, or you may never have thought of it. And if that's the case, think about it. How would your story of self go? It's the what happened in your life and what decisions did you make that got you to this commitment, in this case with the United Nations Association. So here's a shortened version of mine. I have a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in music, and I played percussion instruments in the Miami Philharmonic Orchestra for 12 years and taught high school music. And 44 years ago, I founded the Anti-Poverty Lobby Results. And a lot of time it's music, poverty lobby. What's the connection? And when I look back in my life, there's certain experiences that start pointing me in a different direction. The death of a high school fraternity brother around high school graduation in 1964 and the assassination of US Senator Robert Kennedy around college graduation in 1968 got me to asking the questions of purpose. Why am I here? What am I here to do? What's my purpose? 9 years, it's not like I wake up every morning with that question, but it's in the background, that question and that nudge of, okay, why are you here? What are you here to do? 9 years later, 1977, I'm invited to a presentation on ending world hunger at the Carillon Hotel on Miami Beach, Florida, where I lived, put on by the Hunger Project. And I go to this event thinking, well, hunger's inevitable. What do I know? I'm a musician. Well, I'm thinking it's inevitable in my mind because there are no solutions, because if there were solution, somebody would have would have done something by now. But I go to this event and it's obvious right away there's no mystery to growing food, clean water, basic health, literacy. I'm not hopeless about the perceived lack of solutions. I'm hopeless about human nature. People will just never get around to doing the things that can be done. But there's one human nature I have some control over, my own, and my questions. Why am I here? What am I here to do? So I get involved in a big way. This is the end of the story. In 1978, 1979, I spoke to 7,000 high school students, classroom by classroom, on ending world hunger. And before I went into the first classroom, I read some statements from the US National Academy of Sciences, Food and Nutrition Study, and others calling for the political will to end hunger. So I asked 7,000 high school students, actually a number of them in Southern California, in Miami, and later when I moved to LA, what's the name of your member of Congress? I don't want to know if you wrote him. I don't want to know if you met him, just the name. And out of 7,000 asked, 200, fewer than 3%, could answer correctly, and 6,800, over 97%, could not tell me the name of their member of Congress. And results grew out of this gap between the calls for the political will to end hunger on the one hand and the lack of basic information on who represented us in Washington on the other. I'm going to actually say this thing because I'm doing the sort of 20-minute plus version of my talk and my slides, and I leave this part out, and I'm going to put it in right now briefly. One of the things that Results Volunteers, which was started in 1980 in Los Angeles, technically in Van Nuys, California, uh, was that we lobbied starting in 1984 on child survival, completely following the lead of Jim Grant, the executive director of UNICEF, the UN Children's Fund. And we lobbied on child survival every year from 84 to 2024. And when we started lobbying, UNICEF was reporting that 40,000 children around the world were dying every day from preventable things. measles coupled with malnutrition, etc. The latest numbers from UNICEF in the book, anyway, are that by 2021, the 40,000 child deaths a day had fallen by nearly 66% to 13,800 a day. This is United Nations leadership. This is UNICEF, UN Children's Fund, and more. And results volunteers essentially lobbied every year on those kinds of things. Actually, I'm going to read you one little statement. In 1986, the volunteers generated 90 editorials on tripling the Child Survival Fund, and we'd send them out to key leaders 4 at a time, 5 at a time. And at the end, Jim Grant, the head of UNICEF, said a handwritten note. He wrote, "I thank you in my mind at least weekly, if not more often, for what you and your colleagues are accomplishing. But I thought I should do it at least once this year in writing." And then 27 years later, Kul Gautam, former deputy executive director of UNICEF, again, UN Children's Fund, said he was quoted in the New York Times as saying, "To a great extent, it was because of the receptivity created by results that the US funding for child survival increased so dramatically, and that led many other countries to come on board." So I'm just saying, among other things, out of this gap between the calls for the political will to end hunger and the lack of information who represent us in Washington, results was started. And out of the good grace to connect with Jim Grant and UNICEF, we were empowered big time to make a big difference in the world. Let me move on to the main idea in the book. The main idea is transformational advocacy. And actually, this is inspired by Johns Hopkins professor Hari Hahn. She calls it transactional mobilizing and transformational organizing. I refer to it, that which refers to more what the staff does. I refer a bit more to what the volunteers do. Transactional advocacy, that's like sign the petition, transaction complete, and transformational advocacy, where you're empowered, encouraged, and then succeed at doing things you never thought you could do, like maybe meet with the local editorial board and bring them on your side. And as a result, see yourself in a new light, see yourself as a community leader. So I'm going to go back to my slides. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these, but I want you to get a flavor of it. The independent sector did a survey last year and found that 31% of nonprofits were engaging in advocacy and lobbying over the last 5 years, which is less than half the number doing so in 2000, more than 20 years ago. So there's less advocacy, and it gets worse. The Congressional Management Foundation did a survey of advocacy professionals, and they asked what their primary grassroots advocacy tactic was, and 79% said that a form email, give me your zip code and your name and we'll send the letter for you. 79% said that was their primary grassroots advocacy tactic, but only 3% of congressional staff said that a form email has a lot of impact on their office's decisions. 94% of congressional staff said in-person issue visits from constituents, that's you and me, would have some or a lot of influence on their decision. So we're not getting the support generally. I mean, in the United States, I'm not talking about UNA in particular, but the US, the support and training we need to engage in transformational advocacy. I'm going to tell a couple of stories. The first one is of Maxine Thomas. That's Maxine Thomas with her Senator Todd Young, Republican of Indiana. Maxine has a lived experience of poverty. She said, "I had a heart for service, but I was clueless about advocacy, especially political advocacy." She joins a group called Circles for people who are motivated or committed to moving out of poverty. And her group discovers they have a story to tell. and they Google around who can help us tell our story, and they find results and join results. And Maxine gets a scholarship and with two others in her circles group to go to the results conference in DC, like your conference coming up in DC. And the night before her first ever meetings with her elected official, she learns that the earned income tax credit is about to expire. And the earned income tax credit in 2020, a working low income family would receive $3,100 as a result. So this is the book I've put. This is a quote from the book that I put on these slides. This is Maxine speaking in the book. The first congressional meeting on Lobby Day was with Senator Dan Coates and brought new ahas. He was there for the entire meeting. I can still feel it. I was a ball of emotions. It felt like an out of body experience. I was processing being in DC, and now I'm in an exclusive meeting. We're all dressed up. It was high level. The volunteers were polished and sharp, but I was scared and worried whether I would say the right thing. We're headed toward transformational advocacy in a moment. I think it was Lisa who said, "Would you like to say anything?" I thanked the senator and said, "I learned last night why I'm here. I didn't know I could come here from Indianapolis to talk to you, someone who represents us and can help us. I can't imagine what will happen if the earned income tax credit is taken away from families like mine. I'm able to take a deep breath and catch up on my bills because of the EITC. I look forward to tax time because that's the only time I can handle my financial burden. I like to take my kids to the mall to buy shoes without worrying if it will take away from other bills." Senator Coates straightened himself up and said, "Wow, this has been emotional. Results, you do a good job of training people. Where did you find her?" And then he thanked me. That was the year he retired. He was very connected, even though it wasn't on his radar. He acknowledged my voice and thanked me for being there. At the end of the full day of congressional meetings, first ever congressional meetings for Maxine, she said, quote, "I was euphoric. I was on this high and felt I was part of something revolutionary. That's a far cry from feeling hopeless and cynical. I was euphoric is transformational advocacy. And here's what you look for in an organization to see that it's delivering transformational advocacy. One, recruitment. Actually, Barbara was mentioning recruitment, bringing in young people for recruitment, not building an e-blast list, but real people talking to real people to form them into chapters or groups. That's recruitment. And building community like a once a monthly whole of organization webinar with guest speakers, Q&A, inspiration. One, recruitment and community building. Two, training. How do you get the meeting? How do you plan for the meeting? What do you ask for in the meeting? How do you write a letter to the editor? How do you meet with it? Training. Three, the organization encourages breakthroughs. They encourage members to move out of their comfort zones because confidence grows and transformation happens when you're encouraged and supported in doing things you thought you couldn't do and succeed. There's a drawing in the book, a small circle labeled your comfort zone, and to the right is a much larger circle labeled where the magic happens. You're not looking for someone who will kick you out of your comfort zone, but encourage you out of your comfort zone. Next story. This is it's interesting how this is all so UN connected. In 2019, President Trump called for a 29% cut to the Global Fund to fight AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria after it had saved 38 million lives since its launch in 2002. 2019 was a year of a Global Fund 3-year replenishment, and other countries would likely follow the US lead. Most people didn't know that the president called for a 29% cut, and many of those who did might throw up their hands. What can you do? You can't fight City Hall. The people I know roll up their sleeves and got into action. They got hundreds of members of Congress, Republicans and Democrats, to co-sponsor resolutions like in the House and Senate supporting the Global Fund and signing letters to Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and the top appropriators supporting the Global Fund. So what do these revolutionary volunteer advocates look like? Well, fix your screen to gallery view and you will see what they look like. Uh, and they also look like Margaret Smith of Dallas, Texas, seen here holding her Senator Ted Cruz's hands with two hands. She said, I learned in results that I hold Senator Cruz's hands with two hands and I don't let go until I finish telling my laser talk on the Global Fund to fight AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria. This was the first year that Senator Cruz had ever co-sponsored or said yes to any of their requests. He co-sponsored the Senate resolution in support of the Global Fund. Instead of President Trump's proposed 29% cut, two House Republicans and two House Democrats stood on a stage in Lyon, France, at the Global Fund replenishment and announced that the Congress would provide a 16% increase to the Global Fund, which it did. And by 2022, the end of the 3-year replenishment, the Global Fund partnership had saved 59 million lives since its inception. And here I'm not going to do it now because of the timing, but I want you to get the UN connections here too. I do a little reading from Stephen Lewis's book, Race Against Time, Searching for Hope in AIDS-Ravaged Africa. It was a series of lectures he gave in Canada in 2005, 3 years after the Global Fund was launched. And it's the part that I would tend to read is about a visit that he makes. Now, Stephen Lewis was special envoy for AIDS in Africa to the UN Secretary General in 2005. And he visits with Gracia Michel, the wife of the late Nelson Mandela. He visits a sibling-headed household where the parents have both died of AIDS. There are no other relatives to care for them. And the household is headed by the oldest sibling, the 14-year-old daughter. The children are ages 14 to 8, and the head of the household is a 14-year-old. And that's why people like you and people like Margaret Smith work on the Global Fund to fight AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria, not just because of numbers, 59 million, but because of the real human lives that are in part of those numbers. This is my last story, and then I'm going to close with a quote. This is about Ellie Sparks. This is Ellie. When she told this story, she was a volunteer. She's now on staff of Citizens Climate Lobby. She said, I joined Citizens Climate Lobby. I was suffering from climate trauma. I would read Bill McKibben's book, Earth, and I would weep at home and I would weep at work. But then I joined CCL, and 18 months later, I was co-leading a workshop on creating relationships with members of Congress and editorial writers. She said, our executive director used to say, we're betting the farm on relationships. Now go get a relationship with your member of Congress. And Ellie said, what in the world does a relationship with a member of Congress look like? How do you get a relationship with an editorial writer? She said some of in the organization use the model of a work relationship. Now, this is quoting, I'm reading from the book now, but I put it on the slides. This is Ellie. My relationship model is different. I adore romantic relationships, so I use romance as my model. That first meeting with the editorial writer, it's like a blind date, only you've decided beforehand you're going to marry this fellow. You're going to be sweet and interesting, not too intense. If it doesn't work out with the editor, you're going to marry one of his friends at the newspaper, the business editor, environment writer, city editor. Someone at this paper will find you interesting and compelling. It's just a matter of being persistent until you find the right connection. I see the relationship with a member of Congress as an arranged marriage. If you live in her district, the member's aide has to meet with you. Well, that's what our congressperson's ledge director told us in January, this is now August, 8 months later, since January, we've met 5 times with the Ledge director over the last 8 months. We schedule 45-minute meetings. He keeps us well over an hour. He doesn't want us to leave. Why? Because a good arranged marriage starts out cold and slowly heats up. That's different than a love match, which starts out hot and slowly cools down. Then Ellie gets to the essence of transformational advocacy. She said, during our conference, I met with 20 congressional offices over 4 days. I met with many folks whose view of the world was very different than mine. Going into their offices was hard. I had to let go of a lot of emotional baggage. I could no longer judge them or hold hostility in my heart toward them. I had to let go of my fear of climate change and my fear that they wouldn't listen to me. I had to center myself in love, releasing fear and centering in love. This is sacred and profound work. Who thinks of political advocacy as being sacred and profound? Obviously, it can become that with the right organization and if you open yourself up to it. I'm going to close. Well, actually, if if your group would like to host a Zoom book talk, let me know. And you can go to the website reclaimingourdemocracy.com. I'll say that once more. I'm going to close with this quote from George Bernard Shaw's Man and Superman. He's basically talking about you. This is the true joy in life, the being used for a purpose, recognized by yourself as a mighty one, the being a force of nature, instead of a selfish, feverish little clod of ailments and grievances, complaining that the world will not devote itself to making you happy. I am of the opinion that my life belongs to the whole community, and it is my privilege to do for it whatever I can. I want to be thoroughly used up when I die, for the harder I work, the more I live. I rejoice in life for its own sake. Life is no brief candle to me. It is a sort of splendid torch which I've got hold of for the moment, and I want to make it burn as brightly as possible before handing it on to future generations. And I usually read it twice and I won't. This is the true joy in life.
Mm.
The being used for a purpose, recognized by yourself as a mighty one. I'm going to stop there. I would normally have read it twice, but I think you get the idea. So anyway, I'm grateful to you. I'm grateful to the work you do with UNA, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to talk with you and have some dialogue right now.
Well, you know, Sam, you're pretty motivational. You know, I'm looking at my friend Mike Caruso, and it says Ending War 101. Okay. You worked very hard under transformational advocacy to keep the UNICEF funded. And now we need to end war. So maybe we'll have a meeting with you on putting our transformational advocacy together so that we can talk to every single congressperson that the UNA represents.
Yeah.
Let's get this wars over with, because now we're at different points. It's not only that, there's so many things that are repercussions from this. But Sam, what are you thinking on that?
Well, let me say one thing, and Buckminster Fuller, the futurist inventor, used the word trim tab. And he would talk about the ship, ocean liner. He says a big ocean liner is very hard to turn. Even the massive rudder at the back is hard, but the end of the rudder is a little trim tab. And if you turn the trim tab, then the rudder will turn and then the ship will turn. And he said, with regard to the ship of state, don't ever try and turn the ship. Don't even try and turn the rudder. Find the trim tabs and turn those, and then the rest will turn with greater ease. And so my question to all of us with regard to ending war, what are the trim tabs? I mean, in our work and results, the trim tabs were our members of Congress, the congressional aides, our editorial writers, other community leaders. And so the question that I want to ask is, what are the trim tabs? And are we meeting them, turning them, kind of thing? What are the vehicles? And what is the, maybe the resolution, the legislation, the whatever it is? And those kinds of questions that I would ask about all of that.
I love that because I think we've been going after the big ship. We've been trying to get the whole ship to turn. And it's really important what you just now said, because you find that what motivates and moves from different points of view. And I remember you telling me the story that when your book came out, you didn't just start to call everybody, you called 30 people up and said, tell us that story. This is
Well,
really,
yeah. So I'm going to say a couple of ways of it. There's a methodology and results and Citizens Climate Lobby for writing a letter to the editor. And you look for an article that's an opening to your bill or whatever, and you hopefully craft a short and good letter, and then you write the editor. Well, we've been using a modified letters to the editor format, looking for a column or a radio show or whatever that's an opening to the ideas and reclaiming our democracy. And rather than writing the editor, we're writing the columnist or the host or the producer of the show. And I had a team of 30 plus friends who would meet twice a month. And we're kind of into once a month now. The first year before the book was coming out, we had written 327 journalists about a specific piece of theirs, quoting back to them their words, and then saying how their words linked to the ideas in the book. Well, we wrote, now it's over 400, but rewrote 327 by January 1, and 126 asked for an advanced copy of the book. Now, I don't pretend they opened it necessarily. Some did, some didn't. And wait, 220 never wrote me back ever. I mean, I wrote them a couple of times. I didn't write them once. So I was in this period, I still am, called collecting no's. And I was just kind of luxuriating in seeing how many no's I could get, because I knew if I got enough no's, there'd be some yeses in there. I mean, if I wrote 4 people, there might be 1 yes. If I wrote 40, there might be 10. And if I wrote 400, there might be 100 yeses.
that's you brought up a point I was going to bring. In the description that we gave you about Sam, you can listen to his NPR interviews. You can listen to his interviews and see how he handles the media. Sam, is there a question you'd like to ask us?
Well, I would like to ask, like the conference coming up in June at the Hamilton Hotel, does that have lobby day visits with congressional offices as part of it?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes,
great.
absolutely.
Yeah, and so will you start in May or something, making those appointments so that when you get there, you've got a
Yes.
number of them? Okay, great. So the next question is, when it's not lobby day and you're back home in Southern California, do you continue those meetings?
Doubt
Do
it.
you continue building those relationships? A, with the staff for sure, but B, of course, with the members of Congress themselves. And it's something to consider. The other question I would ask is, do you know now, and it's fine if you don't, because they may have something that they're putting together for June. Do you know now what, let's call it the primary ask will be of Congress? I'd love to hear a little bit about it. I'm just curious. And is it
funding the United Nations.
Okay, is it particularly the United Nations?
The funding for the United Nations has
Great.
always been it.
Yeah, yeah.
With specific emphasis on full funding of the peacekeepers.
Okay, great, great, very good, very good.
Al might have something to add to that.
I don't know if we'll have a special ask for UNRWA or not. Some members are, we know that the United States has been the principal funder for UNRWA for a long time, and with the current cloud over UNRWA,
Yeah.
There's some hesitancy to do that. In the current funding package, it's carved out UNRWA.
Okay.
So they may make a run at that.
Yeah, let me say this, Mel, you're my member of Congress.
Yep.
And you oppose UNRWA. I'm making this up. I have, when I'm coaching a group that's meeting with a member of Congress who opposes their bill or opposes their issue or opposes UNRWA or whatever, I have them ask 3 questions. So Mel, I'm going to ask you these questions. You don't have to answer, but you'll get the idea. I know you don't support UNRWA. What would it take to change your mind? Question 2, could you say more about that? Question 3, why do you think that is? And basically, it's a deep listening exercise. And frankly, you're listening for assignments. And I'm thinking of a friend from Pennsylvania whose goal was to get a lead Republican on a House Climate Solutions Caucus from South Florida. He would fly down to South Florida to do this. And he had a couple of targets. He asked them, we know you don't support this initiative of a Climate Solutions Caucus. And what would it take to change your mind? And the congressman said, well, if you could get the chambers of commerce on board, I might consider. And he did. He got the chambers of commerce, Miami Beach, Coral Gables, North Miami, Hialeah. Came back to the congressman with these letters from the Chamber of Commerce. And the congressman said, well, if you could get the mayors on board, he was wanting to cover his rear end kind of thing. If you could get the mayors on board, and he did, he got the mayors of Miami, Miami Beach, Coral Gables, etc., on board, and the member of Congress came on. So my question and charge really to us, like, for example, if you even have a member of Congress who's not even in support of UN funding, I don't know who your members are, what would it take to change your mind? I'm listening for assignments. Could you say more about that? Why do you think that is? Because sometimes this opposition is about an inch deep. And if we go a little lower, we get to mutual understanding principles. Anyone have a question on anything? Or comment or
You know, I just finished a rather intense lobby day period. AAUW, American Association of University Women, we have an annual lobby day in Sacramento. I'm on the public policy committee for the state, and we meet once a year and go over about 60 some odd bills. We have an advocate, a quote lobbyist part-time in Sacramento, who looks after, you know, bills that relate to our mission, which is economic security for women, educational equity, social and racial justice, and advancing women in leadership. So those are our main goals, okay? So she pulls out about 60 bills or so, and we spend an entire weekend. Each member of the committee gets so many to evaluate and interpret, and then we have our sessions, and we boil that down to about 30. And then from the 30, we have to come up with 3, which are our main priority bills. And one, you know, we sponsor these. One of them, the member of the assembly came to us and said, we want you to sponsor this. Okay. So we did that. So we had our 3 bills. And then we sent out a survey in January to we have about 9,500 members in California. And we asked whoever wanted to sign up to be part of this lobby day. We got about 150 members who did that. So then we tried to match them up with their members, their assembly member and their senator. And we then had our advocate and some other folks then call all these offices and try to get meetings. So we really did a good prep this year. We've learned from previous years where our failures have been and how to do it better. So we had a really good prep this year, and we had a training day session, a night session. It was a couple of hours PowerPoint presentation on how to go about doing this and lobbying. We had actual scripts that the people could use if they felt uncomfortable, just talking naturally. I come from a background where I worked for 2 members of Congress, okay? For almost 30 years, I worked for 2 members of the legislature for a while. So to me, it's not, these guys are all powerful. They're us, basically. And for the most part, you're dealing with staffers. You're not meeting with the member themselves or either in committee or whatever. We had about 46 meetings. We met with, maybe about 10 or so were in person. And, most of the time these staffers you're talking to could be your grandchildren. I mean, you're young, they're in their 20s and in their early 30s. Okay. And basically it's very comfortable. You have the bills, you talk, you say, this is who I am. This is a branch where I am. This is what we do for your constituents on a regular basis. Do you know anything about our organization? And we tell them a few things about our organization so they know. Most of them don't. Some remember us from past years, but they don't really recall what we do. And then, I say, well, we're here, to advocate on behalf of these 3 bills because we feel very strongly about it. And so then I introduce the other people who are with me. 3 or 4 people are ideal on a visit. And then each person introduces and talks about the bill. And we ask, are there any questions you have after this? Can we give you any further information? And, that's, and then we thank them at the end. And, we follow up with a thank you note. And, that's good. We do it once a year. But having worked in an office, what's really important is what you said. You develop a relationship with the local office, because even though the local office doesn't do the legislative work, they keep tabs on what people are calling about, okay, what they're writing about. And ever since, when most of my work with Congress was done prior to the internet taking over like it is now in your life, and AI and everything else.
Which members did you work for?
Oh my God, I was there in Watergate. I was in DC for Watergate. So, there was a whole different Congress around at that point. There were people who actually cared about the country and not about their own political careers. So it was a whole different ballgame. But, it was good. And we kept tabs, how many calls came in on whatever issue. And, obviously we have inside contacts with our DC people and our legislative staff. And we would let them know. And when these people called, you develop a relationship, what's good, what isn't, and you on. And the other thing my boss did, which was very good, that a lot of members don't do now, is because he lived in California but he actually lived in DC and came back once a month. He had town hall meetings at the local elementary schools. They were about 2 hours in length. The first hour he spoke, it was like a lecture in a college thing. He told them exactly what legislation he was considering, how he felt about it. When they asked him questions, he answered. And then the second half was the Q&A.
What was his name? What was his name?
That was Tony Bielenson. I don't know if you ever remembered.
No,
Yeah.
Yeah.
He was in for 20 years, never accept PAC money. And basically, we used to, when he came back in the district, we were at people's homes and we had the same thing happening there where we would meet with them.
Thank you. I think you made it.
I have some Tony Bielenson stories. They're wonderful, but yeah.
Really? Good.
Actually, yeah. Oh, I'm going to tell 2 very quick stories to tell you about how amateur hour results was in the first years, let's say. The first meeting we ever had with a member of Congress was in Seal Beach, California, and it was with Congressman Dan Lundgren. And we showed a 49-minute John Denver film, I Want to Live. And when the film was over, the first question for Congressman Lundgren was, do you get many letters on hunger? That was the question. And Lundgren looks at the ceiling and he goes, there's this Methodist minister in Long Beach. That was his answer. Do you get many letters on hunger? there's this Methodist minister in Long Beach, was his answer. The second meeting we ever had was with Tony Bielenson, and it was in Beverly Hills, and it was at the home of we knew the wife, and the husband was the president of a big record company in Hollywood.
Yeah, right.
And we were like a junior high kind of thing. We didn't know what, and the whole meeting was about family planning and da 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 da, which is cool, but it wasn't really. We had to get our act together, is what I'm getting at. We were rank beginners.
Yeah,
We kept going and learning.
yeah.
Well,
But,
did you feel that Sam gave you a few tips on how to make your advocacy really work, or as your advocacy improving with Sam? You'll find out.
I think my main thing is that whole notion of we're betting the farm on relationships. And do we at AAUW or we at UNA have a bill or a something that, we really want to go to the mat on? And what kind of, let me say this other quick thing. I don't know where we are in time, but I have this thing in the book called the champion scale. My member of Congress is opposed. Oh, she's actually a Neanderthal. No. You want to move opposed up to neutral. Oh, my member of Congress is neutral on our issue. Okay, you want to move them up to supporter. Oh, they're already a supporter. No, you're not done. Our member is a supporter. You want to move them up to being an advocate. They're an advocate. You want to move them up to being a leader. They're a leader. You want to move them up to being a champion. And so there's room for everyone, whether you think you've got the best member of Congress since sliced bread or something, or the worst in the country. Yeah, move them from opposed. And I'll give you one quick thing. I have people go to their website. My member of Congress is opposed. I actually don't agree with them on anything. I have them go to their website and look at their news releases and find one thing that the member of Congress has done that they actually like.
Right.
Write a letter to the editor mentioning them by name and thanking them for their leadership on X, and hoping they can bring that same kind of leadership to UNRWA, or they bring that same kind of leadership to the United Nations or whatever. But yeah, anyway.
Well, I don't know about the rest of you, but I have so much work ahead of me because I realize what I haven't done. I've been going for the big picture, education. I think there need to be a leadership role that's a little different than just saying this is what will be good for you once you hear it. No, now you have to become that transformational advocate. Sam, I cannot thank you enough for giving us this overview today. And I know everybody, when Mel claps, Mel is our advocacy leader. Mel has done more advocacy in Washington than anybody I know. And when he claps, that tells me something, Sam. You have hit the nail on the head for all of us. And Mike and I are going to take it back to our Ending War 101 committee. And, we've been doing it too close to our own. We've been doing the planning. We've been doing the advocating ourselves. Now we see how you build that crew that takes the message, and we become more aware of what our elected leaders are saying, reading their news releases, reading what they're saying, and then bringing in our brilliance. And I see so many people on here today who are take these words. Mel, please.
I was just going to compliment Sam on your presentation and say that you're using the analogy of the trim tab on a ship is so apt. And as an old pilot, I flew for 40 years. There's a trim tab in an airplane too. Same thing. So when you use that metaphor, you can say airplane or ship.
I was just taking it from Buckminster Fuller, who talks about the ship of state.
Yeah.
As it related to it. Yeah, good.
Any other questions? And with that, let's give our Sam a round of applause. It is amazing. we're pretty sophisticated. Our UNAs are pretty sophisticated, but there's always more that we can learn. And I think I'm going to use some of these techniques to get more members. It's time for us to get more members in the UNA. And I think we're going to figure out how using this information we got today. Sam, do you have any other final word for us?
I'm going to give the full quote from, in fact, these days, cynicism is obedience. The full quote is, optimism is a political act. Those who benefit from the status quo are perfectly happy with a large population of people who believe nothing will get any better. In fact, these days, cynicism is obedience. What's really radical is being willing to look right at the magnitude and difficulty of the problems we face and still insist that we can solve those problems. Thank you for still insisting we can solve those problems.
Thank you, Sam. And with that, I'm Barbara Gunmuller, thanking you for joining the UNA SoCal Division meeting. We hold these meetings every other month, and the next one will be coming up in July. And join us. These speakers are phenomenal. Our speaker today opened up a new book for all of us, and I really appreciate that. Sam, what can I say except, wow, you just keep getting better. And I know because I have a lot of friends who have taken results, and do they get results? In fact, I have a whole slew of books that they have written. Thank you all for joining us. And may you stay healthy and get your UNAs on board for advocacy and join Barry in Washington. And you can meet your Congress people where they are sitting. Thank you all. I'm going to say goodbye for now.